Briefly, this one which I thought was not covered yesterday, though the slide was shown, the concept of fifth Veda, Mahabharata as Veda made easy. Let us have a small discussion about it because I think there are a few very important concepts that should go to you. One is that people always talk about Mahabharata being a Panchama Veda, the fifth Veda, but I don't know whether people told you that it's not just Mahabharata, all the Puranas, all the Itihasas and Puranas together, they form a body of Itihasa Puranas. There are Ashtadasha Mahapuranas, 18 Mahapuranas, and Upapuranas are not actually counted, but for the sake of numbering, they usually mention them also to be 18, Ashtadasha Upapuranas. But actually, if you list them, they go beyond 18, but they generally say 18 Upapuranas. And you have this Mahabharata, which is considered to be Itihasa. All of them together form a body. This every one of you should remember and take with you so that this Mahabharata Panchama Veda should not remain with you. Second, the shloka, Narayanam Namaskritya Naranchaiva Narottamam, that shloka is also considered to be, for example, the shloka ends with the line Tato Jayamudiriyat. Then they say, they take this Jayamudiriyat as the word for Mahabharata. Jayam is for Mahabharata they take. But this shloka also occurs in the beginning of all the Puranas. Narayanan Namaskritya Naranchaiva Narottamam is the beginning of all the Itihasas and Puranas. So, this Mahabharata is equal to Jayam is not correct. Jayam is equal to Mahabharata is not correct. Okay? The entire body of Itihasas and Puranas is called Jayam. Okay? And the third point that should go with you, you should take with you, is that Nara and Narayana were partner vice chancellors of a university. Yeah. When I use words like university, professor, that's really wrong because this the university system that we have today is a Western university system. But to make you realize what kind of things were going on in ancient India, you should know that there was a university which was run by Nara and Narayana. They were Narayana was the teacher and Nara was the Shishya, but later they became partners in running the university. So, nowhere in India today we have two vice chancellors running the same university, but they ran, they're Nara and Narayana. And inside Mahabharata and in many other contexts in various Puranas, this university is shown as the model university. For example, Dushyanta enters Kanva's ashrama. He thinks that, oh, this is looking like Nara's and Narayana's university. Kanva's ashrama is very similar to that. Nara and Narayana University is on Ganga shore of Ganga, but this ashrama, Kanva's ashrama, is on the shore of Malini, another river. This Malini is like Ganga and this Kanva is like Nara and Narayana. This is one example. In many other different contexts, this Nara Narayana University is shown as a model university on the bank of Ganga, and the person who is composing the Pitika of all the Puranas, including Mahabharata, he is every time saluting to them, which shows that this job of compiling the Itihasas and Puranas was being done at that university. They were responsible for organizing this activity. But inside the Pitika, it is said that it was Vyasa who was compiling all this. Vyasa's place is a different place. It's an ashrama called Badarika Ashrama. which is there still. Actually, almost all Indians consider visiting Badarikashrama at least one time in their lifetime as the most sacred activity. They go there. It is still there, Badarikashrama is still there. Probably Vyasa is also still there. He can be seen by those people who can see him. There are evidences of, for example, Raghavendra Swami of Mantralayam, from where I come. My place is Mantralayam. There, this Raghavendra Swami was able to see Vyasa while composing his works. And there are many such incidents where saintly people who did tapasya were able to see Vyasa. Adi Shankaracharya also was able to see him. My father saw him. I come from a father who they were mentioning yesterday in my introduction. He is a hyper polyglot. He knew 28 languages proficiently. And he was a scholar in all the Vaidika Shastras, trained in Gurukulas. And ultimately he spent his last part of his life as Sri Vidya Upasaka, Tantrika Upasaka, Lalita Upasaka. Probably because of that or because of his previous birth's abilities, he was able to see many people including Gaudapada, Shankara, and he saw Vyasa also. So it's possible to see Vyasa if you want, but in Badarikashrama. And he compiled the Itihasas and Puranas. And because Westerners, they at least pretend not to believe that there is a person who can compose all this. They create theories like it is a post, someone goes and sits in that post, and they keep compiling books after books and all that. In my opinion, miracles are never miracles. For me, lifting 50 kilos is a miracle, because I can't lift. But there are people who can easily lift 50 kilos. My own children, whenever I bring things from the market, if there are 25 kilos on either sides, I say, no, I cannot, and I get inside the house. My son comes and says, I'll lift it. And he keeps it in my house. But there are people who lift 325 kilos just easily like that. For me, that is a miracle. So, Vyasa compiling so many works is a miracle for people who cannot do this. You might not be able to do this, but there are people who have done that. So, Vyasa has composed all these works, and in the introduction there is a story mentioned. It says, do you know what the word Vyasa means? Classifier. The word Vyasa means classifier. Okay. And his full name is Veda Vyasa. Just as we call somebody like Nagesh as Nagi or something like that, it's shortcut nickname for Veda Vyasa. Full name is actually Veda Vyasa. Why he is being called Veda Vyasa is because he classified Vedas. Veda Vyasa means classifier of the Vedas. And according to that story, by the time Vyasa was sitting to do this at the end of Dwapara Yuga, Vedas were being recited by all the Vedic scholars all over the country, but they hardly had any idea to which branch of Veda it belongs. They knew that there were 4 Vedas because, as I said yesterday, Veda is a self-conscious body of knowledge. So, inside the Veda itself, the words Rig Veda, Yajur Veda, Sama Veda, Atharvana Veda exist. So, people who knew Vedas knew that there are 4 Vedas, but they were trying to see to which Veda their mantra belongs, the mantra that he is reciting belongs, but they did not know. But Vyasa was highly knowledgeable in identifying which features make which mantra to belong to which branch of Vedas, whether it is Rig Veda or Yajur Veda. So, he invited all the Vedic scholars from the entire Indic subcontinent to one place, and he asked them to recite. Come on, recite the Vedas. They recite, and he carefully observes, makes notes, And then he says, okay, yeah, this is Rig Veda, you sit here. So all the Rig Vedas are made to sit at one place. Yajurveda, Samaveda, Atharvana Veda is all classified perfectly. All 4 Vedas are classified. But there come other scholars, Vedic scholars, the material which they are reciting was not known to belong to any of the 4 Vedas. This, any classification, any time anyone does, this kind of situation emerges. When we classify, sort out things and put them into various boxes, some material remains, we do not know where to put it. So then Vyasa said, okay, this is all unclassifiable or unclassified, obscure, confusing, I am not able to put them together. That part is called Khila Bhaga. Khila, Khila. Khila. Khila of the Veda. All of you might know the word Akhila. In all the Indian languages, we have the Sanskrit borrowing Akhila, which means everything, all together. Opposite of this, Khila, which is destroyed, spoiled, damaged. So, Akhila means undamaged, as it is, protected. Khila means damaged. So, Khila Bhaga of Veda means that part of Veda which is damaged. Damaged in the sense, it is obscure, people are not able to figure out what it means, where it belongs and all that. But because scholars like Vyasa, they know the meaning, the content of that, what Vyasa did is took the meaning and compiled all that into the body of Itihasas and Puranas. So, one of the meanings for Panchama Veda that people give is that because a body of knowledge was already classified into 4 parts, the 5th part remained unclassified, confusing, obscure. That was organized, that material was organized into all the Itihasas and Puranas. The 5th category is being called as 5th Veda, Panchama Veda. Okay? Because it is the shloka form composition of the Khila Bhaga, the 5th Bhaga, that did not go into the 4 parts, that is being called as Panchama Veda. This is one explanation from the Pitika Bhaga of all the Itihasas and Puranas. All the Itihasas and Puranas, the Pitika Bhaga is almost the same. The Shloka, Naranchaiva, Narottamam, all these things, they are all there. This story is also common. This yaga, this yajna of inviting all the scholars to one place, and classifying, that is at some places it is called Brahma Satra Yaga. Brahma means Veda. Brahma Satra means Veda Yajna. The Yajna being conducted for classifying Veda was called Brahma Satra Yaga, and it is mentioned there in that book that it took 12 years to conduct this Veda. So, Dvadasha Varsha Brahma Satra Yaga, they call it. In every Itihasa, in every Purana, in the beginning, the same word Dvadasha Varsha Brahma Satra Yaga, or some different words, they are repeated.
Two more questions related to this. So, one is at the time of Veda Vyasa, he classified these Vedas. But if, for example, if you go back to Ramayana, you also see reference to 3 Vedas in Ramayana. So, do we get any references in anywhere in the literature that tells us that what drove the need for the classification in the time of Veda Vyasa?
It is actually, obviously, the people knew in all the previous yugas, Treta Yuga, Treta Yuga, Krita Yuga, Treta Yuga and Dwapara Yuga, that 4 Vedas have to be there. But by the time of end of Dwapara Yuga, because of Kali Yuga coming up, confusion started. People were all confused about which mantra belongs to which Veda. It is a loss of memory of the Vedic scholars. So, Vyasa thought it is high time I do this, because once Kali Yuga enters, it is completely confusing Yuga. So I must organize the whole thing for the sake of the people of Kali Yuga, and he conducted this yaga. That is the reasoning given in the Pitika part.
And another quick question related to the kila bhaga that you mentioned. After classifying, something was left that could not be classified and placed into a category. Now, Rigveda itself has some sukta which are considered kila sukta.
Yes.
If you can comment on that, like where they
It
belong.
is the same. Kila suktas or damaged suktas. Damaged means it doesn't mean that swara is lost or something like that. So, in some cases, swara is lost. In some cases, some words were not according to Shiksha or Pratishakya. In some cases, it was not known where it belongs. Various kinds of problems arose in the case of those suktas. That is why they are called Kila suktas. The word Kila sukta is being used whenever a Vedic scholar is not able to explain the wrongs, the mistakes in the sukta. They say, okay, I'm so sorry. I agree that there are problems. Let us consider that to be a Kila sukta, damaged sukta. Okay, they are there in all the mantras, and he collected the Kila material and composed the body of Itihasas and Puranas. This is one explanation. Second explanation is, in the Pitika part of Mahabharata and Bhagavata, everywhere it is repeated that the body of Itihasas and Puranas was composed for Upabrahmana. Yesterday I was introducing this word, Upabrahmana. What is Upabrahmana? The word Upabrahmana has Upa and Brahmana. Upa is the prefix here. Brahmana in fact is, I am putting I because in modern times we are pronouncing it as I. Otherwise, as per Sanskrit, it is just Brahmana. Okay. So, what is this Brahmana? You know the word Brahman, right? And what is Brahman? Sarvam khalu idam Brahma, that is what Upanishads say, right? Everything is Brahman. All that you see around is Brahman. And we use words like Brahmand. The whole cosmos is called Brahmand. Okay? This word Brahman in Brahman of Upanishads and in the word Brahmanda, it comes from this root Brahma. Brahma is the root for it. One of the beauties of Sanskrit, the reason why people like Sanskrit, at least after learning and relishing the language, is that its roots, when you go to the basic roots, the roots are almost onomatopic. Onomatopic in the sense, they give you the feel of the meaning of the word. For example, the word for tasty material is swad. So, when you say swad, it feels tasty. Say swad. Swad. Right? It's already tasty. Rasa. The very pronunciation of rasa makes you feel the rasa. Right? So, Sanskrit is like that. Whenever we introduce words like this, I have the experience. The experience of talking to people of foreign languages and talking about our culture to them. Whenever I introduce these words, for example, a French person, if I say rasa, he went on saying, walking inside his room, ras, ras. He went on feeling the word rasa all through because that has that sensation. Now look at Brahma. Brahma is Brahma. It is actually the very pronunciation is making it some explosion. Some small thing is getting bulged into a bigger thing. So, Brahman is something which has bulged out of that Andanda, the smallest seed, from which everything has bulged into that. So, Brahman is, the very word means the bulged one, the expanded one. Okay, Brahmanda also means that, the bulged one, the expanded one. Okay? So, from now on you feel the word Brahman. Brahma. Whether it is big bang or small bang, it's a bang. Some bang occurred, and that beginning bang that is imagined in this, that bang is there in the word Brahma. So, for an English speaking person, Big Bang has to come from his class, astrophysics class or cosmology class or physics class. Somebody has to tell him there was a Big Bang. But for Indians, the very word, the very name says Brahma has happened, right? Some big bang has happened and it has come out of that. Okay. So, this Upa-Brahmana also has that Brahmana. So, these Puranas are considered to be expansions, elaborations. Okay. Upa is for making easy. The Upasarga, the prefix Upa, has many such meanings: bringing close, making easy, making it a secret. In Upanishads, the word Upa is for a secret talk. Upanishads are secret talks. Okay? And in Upadhyaya, Upadhyayana, bringing close. Okay? Bringing someone close to the idea, the knowledge. So here in Upa-Brahmana, for ease, Upa means ease, Upa-Brahmana means to expand for ease. So, all Itihasa Puranas are for, they are expansions done for ease. Easing what? Making what easy? The original Veda, the original Vaidika meanings, original meanings of the Veda, they are made easy. So, Upabrahmana, the very word Upabrahmana means making easy. Brahmana means elaboration, Upa means for ease, elaboration for ease is the meaning of the word. So, made, and this word also, I told you, a body of Itihasas and Puranas have common things, Pitika has common. This word Upabrahmana also occurs almost in all the Itihasas and Puranas. There is a shloka which gets repeated every time. Itihasa Puranabhyam Vedam Samupabrahmayet. In some texts it is Vedartham Upabrahmayet, they said. But in most of the manuscripts it is Vedam Samupabrahmayet only. So, the Veda has to be made easy through Itihasas and Puranas. In Sanskrit there is one thing, has to be made is Brahmayet, but most of the times it is used as it is done. It is done. That is, not that it has to be done, it is already done. Itihasas and Puranas are already expansions of the Vedartha for making it easy. For whom they should be made easy? Very clearly, inside the Pitika of all the Itihasas and Puranas, it is said there are many people who cannot pronounce the Veda according to Swara. The Swara, original pronunciation of the Veda has been preserved with great difficulty with the help of 6 Vedangas. All the 6 Vedangas were created just to protect the pronunciation of the Veda, the oral pronunciation of the Veda. So, when you have taken so much efforts to preserve the pronunciation of something, you cannot give it easily to someone and come and say, yeah, come, pronounce it. Everyone comes and pronounces it, and the pronunciation gets lost. It's not easy. So, in the Pitika part it is said that those people who are not being allowed to pronounce it because of the care for preservation of the original pronunciation, for them the meaning can be given. Throughout the Dharma Shastras, throughout the code of conduct of Vaidika people, it is said that knowing the meaning, thinking about the meaning, talking about the meaning of Veda mantras is never prohibited to anyone. Okay, even Gayatri mantra, for example, any person all over the universe can think about the meaning while pronouncing only. Whether he can pronounce or not pronounce, all these things come. So that meaning of the Vedic mantra is elaborated through itihasas and Puranas. Okay. Another thing that you can see is that there is a Veda mantra, it gives you the content in a straightforward, scientific, theoretical manner. But whereas itihasas and Puranas convert it into narratives. So, Upabrahmana is also making a straightforward theoretical statement into narrative form. So, Upabrahmana is giving narrative form also, giving narrative forms to the original Vedartha. Okay? So, Vedartham Upabrahmayet means give narrative form to an original Vedic mantra. And this, if you see any Itihasa and Purana, you can very easily show that this one is connected to this mantra. I heard that Ramayana also has got such mantras, original Rigveda mantras, which were expanded into Ramayana story. But I was always waiting, which mantra, which mantra. But just recently, 2 years ago, one Vedic scholar who comes to my house regularly to do the Ghanapata Parayana, he called me on phone and said, "Sir, I want to know from you whether my opinion is correct or not. I am reciting this mantra. I think this is the original of Ramayana." And he recited the mantra and talked about the meaning. It was exactly the same story like Ramayana story in that. Then he said, probably this is the Moola of Ramayana. Ramayana is an expansion of this Vedic mantra. I said, correct. And if you see Pandavas or Kauravas in Mahabharata, everywhere, each of these characters have got a Vedic Moola. But that is connected in the form of saying that Kunti prayed for that god and that god gave birth to this child. For example, Kunti prays to sun god. Sun god is a Vaidika god only. And if you see the mantras of Aditya, Aruna mantras and other mantras, sun is always described to be having a kavacha. And when total solar eclipse occurred in 77 when I was a child, people were talking about that armor part of sun appearing at the time of total solar eclipse. All around the eclipsed sun, that armor was occurring, and they were saying, see, now the armor, the kavacha of sun is visible, very clearly visible. And that is Sahaja kavacha of the sun god, and Karna has that. And these kundalas also, they are described in the Savitru mantras. They are also quite natural to Karna. So, all the features of sun god are reflected in Karna. If you see Yudhishthira, he is the reflection of, he is the representative of the Yama of the Vaidika mantras. All the features of Yama of the Vaidika mantras are there in Dharma Raja also. Similarly, Ashwani Devatas, their representatives are Nakula and Sahadeva. You have Vayu, again a Vaidika Devata. You have Bhima. You have Indra, again a Vaidika Devata. You have Arjuna. Actually, the Western scholars, they don't reject all these things. There is a book, I will try to recollect, on this issue of which Vaidika mantra is the Moola for which of the Itihasa Purana stories. Recently, I was sharing this with Dr. Arvind Rao, ex-DGP of Undivided Andhra Pradesh. He has now entered Sanskrit scholarship. He is studying Sanskrit literature, books and all that. When he was asking about this, I referred him to this book. It is by a Western scholar. Our own Indian scholars usually don't go for this. But if you see, he has collected almost 150 stories from Vaidika mantras which have turned into Puranas, Itihasas and Puranas, how they are connected. So, all the Puranas and Itihasas are made easy elaborations of the original Vaidika mantras. This also your generation, younger generation has to keep in mind, and you have to search for those connections, which mantra is elaborated into which story. Nilesh ji probably is looking at me with anger, angrily. This is elaboration of Vaidika mantras. So it did not happen. None of these stories have happened. This is the question which I encounter in almost all my classes for the last 30 years. Students come from traditional Hindu background, and their parents have told them that all these stories have actually happened and they are historical happenings. And when I say things like this, they say, so they did not occur? I'm not saying that they did not occur. See, I have, for example, I can take a happening of 2018 also, and using that happening, I can expand an idea. It's a historical happening only. Using that historical happening, I can expand a Vedic idea always. So, by saying that it is Vedartha Upabrahmana, nobody is contradicting the point that they have actually happened. Okay? They could have happened also. They could not have happened also. That's a different question. But Vedartha Upabrahmana, the book itself is saying, this is made easy elaboration of the Vaidika mantra. Okay, so how can I reject what the book is saying? If I say that I am this, my identity is this, the people have to accept. Why the Purana itself is saying that it is Vedartha Upabrahmana, right? So, if it is a historical happening, if it is proved by Nilesh ji and Shrikant Talageri ji or any other historian, there is another friend, Jijit Namaduri Ravi, or many others who are working in this area, yes, well and good, they can prove that. But they should also agree that the self-conscious Vedic literature, Itihasas and Puranas, are calling themselves as Upabrahmana of the Vaidika ideas. So, whenever I talk about Mahabharata in future, you should always remember that these ideas are Vaidika ideas, they are there in Vaidika mantras that are being expanded into Mahabharata, not that Mahabharata is doing something very original, all by itself. So, whenever I go back to Vedas, you remember I am going back to that because I have to prove that Mahabharata is a Vaidika Grantha. It is Vedartha Upabrahmana only. It's my responsibility to go back every time and show that the ideas are already there in the Vaidika Granthas. And this problem occurs to me frequently, just as I told you yesterday. When I say Ahimsa Paramo Dharmaha is part of Mahabharata, I told you that it is repeated 23 times. In the critical edition by Suktankar, Suktankar removed all the interpolations. The text which is devoid of all the interpolations only is the critical edition. So that text has 23 times Ahimsa Paramo Dharma. When I mentioned this, immediately a professor from Deccan College, Pune reacted saying, sir, Ahimsa Paramo Dharma cannot be there in Vaidika because you are all violent people. Vaidika is violent. This is a borrowing from Buddhism. And there were members in the forum who are Buddhists also by religion. They also started saying, yeah, this is from us only, Ahimsa. Ahimsa has to come only from Buddha. So how can you have it? The amount of time I spent yesterday to show that Ahimsa Paramo Dharma has roots in Vedas was for this reason. You will encounter them. These two are from Kaladi, are you right? So in Kaladi there is a huge left liberal gang there. Actually almost the whole university has become left liberal there. So you will encounter these people. You cannot have anything originally Vaidika there. And if you go, all these young children also, whenever they go and encounter people, they will encounter these questions. So it's my responsibility to provide you ammunition, to provide you strength, to have evidences to argue with them that no, Ahimsa Paramo Dharma is in Mahimsihi mantras only, already it is there. And there is Sugrucha also, which is not there in Jainism, which is not there in Buddhism. So there is a balance. All this you have to know. So the amount of time I am spending every time to go back to Veda mantras and all that is for this reason, friends, you remember and tell others. Sugricha.
Also, Patruji, I'm sure these verses come multiple places. As an illustration, could you reference one or two, like where they occur in Rigveda, where the word Surucha and Mahimsi appears?
Yeah, I'll recite, I'll take the mantras and show you.
Okay.
They are not at the top of my mind right now, but I can.
Number, okay.
Yeah, I'll give you the whole reference. A book.
Hello. Yeah, you just mentioned.
I'll give you that reference also. Yeah. I'll give you that. It's all there in the system. It's not at the top of my mind. I'll give you. Okay. You had a question. You. Yes, anda.
What does it come from?
Andanda, Pindanda and Brahmanda. The idea is that there was egg-like seed and embryonic seed and the whole expansion. Okay, Pinda means fetus. Anda means seed. Seed to fetus to the whole expansion. And in all the three, common word is anda, which is something which looks like egg. Okay, seed egg, fetus egg, and the whole expanded egg. Okay, so it was pinching me all the time that I did not make these things clear to you. What is meant by fifth Veda? Not only Mahabharata, all Itihasas and Puranas are fifth Veda, and that is why we repeatedly go. And now, among the Upabrahmanas, Mahabharata, Bhagavata, and all these books, just for the sake of ease, let us say Mahabharata is Trivarga oriented and Mahabhagavata is Moksha oriented. What is Trivarga? Among the Purusharthas, Dharma, Artha, Kama and Moksha, the first three are classified as Trivarga. The fourth one is called the Chaturtha Varga. Chaturtha Varga, Trivarga and Chaturtha Varga. Mahabharata is Trivarga oriented book, whereas Bhagavata is the Chaturtha Varga oriented book. So Bhagavata is giving narrative form to the moksha-oriented Upanishadic material. Upanishads, Vedanta is moksha-oriented, obviously, and Mimamsa, Purva Mimamsa is Trivarga-oriented. There is moksha, it is discussed, but it becomes secondary there. In Shanti Parva, for example, moksha is discussed. In Bhagavad Gita, which is part of Bhishma Parva, moksha is discussed, but it becomes secondary because towards the end of the book, Vyasa is saying, actually I am raising my both hands and I am telling you this is dharma, this is dharma, this is dharma. Please follow what I am saying. Dharma is what I am mentioning in this book. Okay, so Urdhva Bahu, he says, I am becoming Urdhva Bahu, I am raising both my hands and I am telling you this is dharma. Okay, so he is saying that dharma is the message of Mahabharata, and it is actually, and it is almost, Mahabharata is the Purva Mimamsa kind of book, Bhagavata is Uttara Mimamsa, Vedanta kind of book. So Bhagavata is a narrative form. And what are these narrative forms also? For the benefit of those who want easy examples, I always tell, give the example of Vicks tablet advertisement. Vicks, you have seen Vicks tablet advertisement? There are some kitch people here inside the throat. They show the visuals of the kitch people. They look very ugly and slimy objects, slimy things, slimy people. And the tablet goes and kills them, everything is very clear. But the same advertisement can be made as saying that you see in your throat there are some allergens which actually stick to the mucus, and the material that we have in the Vicks VapoRub tablets, it reacts with the allergens and the reaction is very powerful. The allergens are neutralized by our Vicks VapoRub tablet. This advertisement also can be given. Which advertisement works? I can give this theoretical explanation of allergens getting neutralized by the tablet and all that. And the visual, which works? That visualization, the narrativization. So, all the Itihasas and Puranas are the Vicks tablet advertisements for Mimamsa and Vedanta. Okay? You understand what I am saying? So, the theoretical part is there in the Mimamsa and Vedanta. In the Brahmanas and Aranyakas, which are the root of Jaimini Sutras, they have the theoretical explanation in the form of allergens, neutralizing and all that. But that is given a visual form in the Itihasas and Puranas. Okay? So, Itihasas and Puranas are made easy. Are they made easy? Vicks VapoRub advertisement, Vicks tablet advertisement, if it is easy, they are also easy. So, that made easy is Upabrahmana. So, actually Vicks tablet advertisement also is Upabrahmana only. We can call it Upabrahmana. It is Upabrahmana of a scientific explanation for how the tablet works. Right? Okay. So, Trivarga is being explained in Mahabharata. What is this Trivarga? There is Dharma, Artha and Kama. All the Chatur Vargas, all the Purusharthas are said to be the purposes of life. Actually, there is always this question, what is the meaning of my life? What is the purpose of my life? Right? Every time a person gets this question, what is the meaning of my life? Did anyone anywhere said, what is the meaning of my life? Yes, in India, in Hinduism, in Vedic culture, they have said what is the meaning of life. They have given 4 meanings of life. Dharma is the meaning of life, Artha is the meaning of life, Kama is the meaning of life, and Moksha is the meaning means what you mean to achieve, what you aim to achieve, right? What is the purpose of your life? So, your purpose of life is to achieve these 4. And how do you achieve Dharma? Artha is wealth and power. Wealth and power you can always achieve. You can see them, achieve them. Kama is pleasure. Pleasure is out there, you can see this is pleasure, you can achieve. How can you achieve dharma? Where is dharma? How can you achieve that? To achieve artha and kama ethically is to achieve dharma. There is no other way of achieving dharma. Like artha, wealth and power, and like kama, which is pleasure, out there to be achieved, dharma is not there out there to be achieved. Dharma can be achieved only through the acquisition of artha and kama in an ethical way. Right? So, by achieving artha and kama in an ethical way, you are achieving dharma. So, what is Mahabharata showing? Mahabharata is showing how to acquire artha and kama as per dharma, as per the limits of dharma. What is dharma? Then what are ethics? You want to achieve your artha and kama, you have every right to achieve, but everyone else also has the right to achieve. So, your liberty, your freedom to achieve artha and kama is limited by the other's freedom to achieve the same. So, there is a tussle, there is a competition. In that competition, not to touch the toes of the other person, not to press the toes of the other person, not to hurt him, you have to limit your own freedom. That limiting your freedom is called ethics. Ethics is all about limiting your freedom, and your freedom is getting limited by the freedom of others. They also have the same freedom to achieve their own artha also. So don't grab their artha, take your own artha is ethics. Artha that comes to you by your own effort, you take it. Don't grab others' artha. Achieve kama in an ethical way. So that is dharma. Okay? So Mahabharata's message is to achieve artha and kama all by dharma. Now you will understand when I go inside the topic, you will understand this. Dharmaraja is going to say in this block that we are going to discuss today that he is going to spend 30 shlokas, more than 30 shlokas on explaining why dhanam is very important. He says dhanam is very important. If you don't have dhanam, you don't count for anyone. Without dhanam, you are a dead person. Without a dhanam, you are a deceased person. Without dhanam, nothing is happening in this universe. There are 30 shlokas in Bhagavad Dhyana Parva by Yudhishthira, all praising dhanam, 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 dhanam. Then one can get surprised and see, what is this Yudhishthira? Always we thought Yudhishthira is a useless fellow. He always says, don't do this, don't do this, I will not do this, I will not do that. But this fellow is saying dhanam is very important. And then next he comes and says, vengeance is very bad. And on vengeance also he spends some 30 shlokas, not even more than 30 shlokas, and says, so war is bad. Without war, how do you get dhanam? That is the whole story. That is the whole argument in Bhagavad Dhyana Parva by Yudhishthira. So he says, I don't want war, but I want dhanam. So he is not saying, it looks as though when Dharmaraja, when Yudhishthira speaks, it looks as though he is rejecting everything, he doesn't want anything. Because I don't want war, I don't want war. When he says, I don't want war, people might think that he is not asking for anything. But before saying, I don't want war, he spent some more than 30 shlokas on dhanam itself. I want rajyam. I want the wealth. I want the power. Then he says this. Okay? So, with this introduction, let us go into this. Strategic and diplomatic studies. These words I am using from the modern political science terminology. In modern political science terminology, there is a branch called strategic studies. There is another branch called diplomatic studies. in strategic studies they spend on how war strategies only. The strategic studies is all about war strategies, how to respond to the enemy and all that. But diplomatic studies is different, how to interact with the other nations, how to communicate with the other nations, how to negotiate and all that. When this Palestina-Israel problem was very hard, nowadays it's not being discussed so much. When Yasser Arafat was alive, those days people used to always pity the Palestinians, saying they are very poor negotiators. Whereas in behalf of Israel, highly professional American negotiators is sitting. So it's very easy to trap the Palestinian negotiators in the discussion. So that gradually people realized that negotiation methods are very, very important. It's a good skill people have to acquire, people have to train people about how to negotiate on the negotiating table and all that. One of the professors of University of Hyderabad, he did his PhD in negotiations. Just because of that topic, he got so much promoted that very quickly he became a vice chancellor of a university. Yeah, his name is Professor B.P. Sanjay of Communication Department of University of Hyderabad. He was a lecturer in Chennai somewhere, but because of his PhD in Canada about negotiations, he got so quickly promoted at every place because negotiations are so important for the government. So they kept on inviting him for consultation, and in that he developed his relations with the people who matter, and that got him vice chancellorship. So if you want vice chancellorship, do negotiations. Okay, study negotiations. It's a very important discipline. Diplomatic studies is very important. And strategic studies. Today there are private organizations and government organizations both on spending time on strategic studies. In Delhi, in Chennai, in Mangalore, there are government bodies for which are called Center for Strategic Studies, Center for Strategic and War Studies, Center for War and Weapons Studies, all these things. So these strategic and diplomatic studies, they become part of this. Why war? Various perspectives are covered in the Udyoga Parva. Why negotiations? Ethics and strategy, both, that is discussed here. The whole problem that is being discussed by Yudhishthira is being a Kshatriya is very difficult, and there is fate and free will discussion. Why war? Why war is within Bhagavad Dhyana Parva, Sanjaya comes and goes and conveys the message to Kauravas in behalf of Pandavas, brings back message from Kauravas to Pandavas. After all this is done, Bhagavad Dhyana Parva comes, when Dharmaraja Yudhishthira says, let us go again to Krishna and request him to go and talk to Kauravas to stop the war. That is where Bhagavad Dhyana Parva begins. And Yudhishthira starts speaking. This is where in the first speech of Yudhishthira that he talks about the importance of dhanam and all that I was mentioning. Later Bhimasena speaks, then Arjuna speaks, then Nakula. After all these people, Sahadeva comes. It is Sahadeva who gives the arguments for why there has to be war. But in the Yudhishthira speech also, the reasons for war are already mentioned. In Yudhishthira's speech, he says, see, I have done everything to avoid the war. But I want my Rajya, my share of the kingdom, which has to come because of my being the son of Panduraja, who has every right for equal share. I have to get that Rajya. So for that, the only option left for me now is war. That is why I have to go for war. But did anyone tell you, actually is this villain a hero? I have written here because during modern times all villains are shown as heroes. Ravanasura is a big hero now, isn't it? He is shown, there is a movie called Ravan, where Ravana is shown as a hero. And it is fashionable nowadays to say that actually I like Ravana the most. In fact, I like Ravana more than Rama. It is so fashionable to say nowadays, right? And in the same fashion, they extend to Mahabharata and say, Duryodhana was a great man. Actually, Duryodhana was such a good person. Karna also, great man. Karna is a really great person. So, this making villains into heroes is a modern time fashion. Do you know why Dharmaraja had to go for war? Why he was right? People say, see, Yudhishthira lost all his kingdom and wife in Dyuta, in gambling. How does he have a right to claim the Rajya again? He has lost it. How can he ask for the Rajya which he lost? Tell me. How is he justified? Anyone? He lost, no? If he lost, he cannot get it back. Why? How is he justified to ask for the kingdom after all this? Any reason, you know? Huh? After the exile, he was promised. Okay, I will also promise. After 10 years, I will give you some 10 rupees. If I don't give, you grab the 10 rupees from my pocket. Huh? That's okay. Let us talk about it whether he had a right to gamble the kingdom or not. That's a different story. But let us say he has lost it. Okay. Okay. Now let me tell you the story. I just wanted to know whether you know this or not. I just checked it. Now that I know that you have not seen this, so that you will tell the Ravana lovers and Duryodhana lovers why Ravana and Duryodhana are wrong, let me tell you. Nowadays, instead of Dyuta, instead of those Juva, you have playing cards. People play cards and they lose money in that. And sometimes in villages, what happens is the person loses his property. He says, this house I am betting as part of playing cards. He loses it. Then usually what happens is the village elders inside the village, they all come and say, see, you fool, why did you lose your house, which is very important, it was your ancestral property and all that, and scold the other person also. What is this nonsense? Why did you play with houses and all that? Then he says, okay, anyway, he lost it in the game. But if all of you want to protect that house and give it back to him, I have a condition. He has to give me his bike. If he gives his bike, I will give the house back to him. If he has to give me the car, then I will give the house back. There are many such bargains done in playing cards. Sometimes what they do is, okay, he has no bike, he has no car, let him do this. Let him make 100 rounds around our village. Let him run. If he runs 100 rounds around our village, I will give the house back to him. This is the bargain. Okay. So, this 100 rounds, making 100 rounds around the village is the cost that is being paid to buy the house back. Okay. So, at the end of Dyuta in Sabha Parva also, all the elders like Drona, Bhishma and others scolded everyone. They scolded even Dharmaraja, Yudhishthira, they scolded everyone. They said, this is very bad, why did you do this? He lost his kingdom, give it back. Then Duryodhana said the same. Let him make 100 rounds around our village. Instead of that, he said 12 years of exile in forest and 1 year of incognito life. So, inside a village, if village elders say that the other party says that he has to make 100 rounds around the village, and he does all the 100 rounds around the village, almost he is fainting. At that stage, this person says, it was all for fun, eh? I don't want to give the house. Now go and do whatever you like. Is it justified? Huh? You understand what I am saying? Now this 100 rounds around the village is done by Dharmaraja, Yudhishthira and all the Pandavas. They have done the 12 years of exile, 1 year of incognito, Ajnatavasa, and they were almost fainting. Am I unnecessarily adding this fainting job? You see, you read Udyoga Parva, everyone, Yudhishthira, Bhima, Arjuna say, Krishna, we are fainting because of this 12 years of exile, 1 year of incognito. We are so tired now. We are not able to accept anything. We are not able to eat food at one place. Arjuna says, while talking to Sri Krishna, Arjuna says, we are not able to even eat food, Krishna, because of the tiresomeness that we got out of our 13 years of life. So after this, Duryodhana says, it was all just for fun. I don't want to give the kingdom back. If this happens to you, will you be angry? You will not be angry? If someone says, of course, you will be angry. So this is what in Bhagavad Dhyana Parva, repeatedly Yudhishthira, Bhima, Arjuna, Nakula and Sahadeva, all the 5, repeatedly say, this they are doing after 13 years of our hard life, when we have fulfilled all the conditions that they have put to us. If they wanted to do this, they should have done 13 years ago. They cannot do it now when we have fulfilled all the conditions. Okay? So tell all the Duryodhana lovers that this Duryodhana did this. What did Duryodhana do? He promised that as a cost for the lost kingdom, he was asking 12 years of Vanavasa and 1 year of Ajnatavasa, and when Pandavas fulfilled everything, he said, it was just for fun, I don't want to give the kingdom back. Obviously, anyone who receives this kind of treatment gets angry. That is why Pandavas got angry. That was the reason for war. Why war? The first perspective is that they were cheated. They were promised and the promise was broken. Okay? And
that Dyuta Krida had happened twice, and the Pana for the second Dyuta, they say, Samrajyam Pratipattavyam Itarai Rathavetaraihi, after 12 years of Vanavasa and 1 year of Ajnatavasa, and in the end of the 13th year, then you can occupy your kingdom. This was the Pana only for the second Dyuta.
yeah, that second Dyuta was organized only because Bhishma, Drona, first it was started by Vikarna.
Yeah.
Vikarna starts the discussion, and after that Bhishma, Drona, everyone joins. Then the second Dyuta was organized because of Shakuni's suggestion. He says that, okay, now we can give it back, let us start another game.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it is the same. Actually, the point is the same, that whether it is Dyuta or no Dyuta, the condition is that you have to do this, then I will give back your kingdom. So the kingdom which was due to them from Duryodhana was not given back. The promise was broken. Okay, so that is the anger. Second, in the Bhagavad Dhyana Parva itself, Draupadi, when she speaks, she says, if you are all going for negotiation and if you want to avoid war, it is your will and wish, go do it. But from my side, I don't like it, because when I was being disrobed, Bhima promised that he will break the lap of Duryodhana. And he promised that he will break the chest of Dushyasana. And how can those promises be kept if there is no war at all? Okay? So, Draupadi's reason for why war is that. So, again question, is Draupadi right in saying that? She was molested, she was disrobed, and she wants her husbands to fulfill their promises. Is it correct? Human rights? Human rights? Whose human rights? Draupadi's human rights or Duryodhana's lapse human rights? Or Dushyasana's chess human rights? Which human rights?
She was the one violated. She did not work to violate them.
Yeah,
They have to pay for violating her.
yeah. Okay, is it okay that Duryodhana needs to be punished? Dushyasana needs to be punished? Any left liberal idea or liberal idea, right liberal at least, liberal right, liberal left idea? Actually, death punishment for rape is too much. Huh? Right? Death punishment for rape is too much, right? He has a human right, the rapist also has a human right. It cannot be violated. In the Nirbhaya incident, people asked Nirbhaya what she wanted before she died. She said they have to be executed, they have to be hanged. Right? And there was such an emotion built up all over the country that they all wanted that to happen, the culprits to be punished. And at the time of Nirbhaya, nobody remembered Draupadi. They should, they must. Draupadi was Nirbhaya. Draupadi was the Nirbhaya of Mahabharata. Draupadi was molested. There was a similar incident after the Nirbhaya incident, similar to Draupadi's incident occurred in Assam. In Gauhati, near a pub, a girl was coming out, they disrobed her, and it was all being videoed by the friends of those who were disrobing the girl. And there was a big response to that also. How can this happen in public place, in front of a public pub? And if Draupadi was demanding that they must be killed and there must be a war and in the war they must be killed, it is that emotion that was built all over the country for Nirbhaya that was happening there. So that is another reason why there has to be war. And someone was mentioning it is Swadharma, Kshatriya has to fulfill his Swadharma. Swadharma is not to acquire kingdom. Swadharma for Kshatriya is to do Dushta Sikshana and Shishta Rakshana. Draupadi is the sister here. She has to be protected. Shishta Rakshana has to take place. And Dushta Sikshana, Duryodhana and Dushyasana have to be punished. And the entire team which supported Shakuni, Karna. Nowadays Karna is a big hero. Huh? But do you know what Karna did at the time of disrobing of Draupadi? Even Duryodhana was just saying disrobe her. Dushyasana was just saying you are a dasi, that is why I am disrobing you. But Karna was using all abusive language sitting there. Karna was using filthy words against Draupadi. He was clapping when disrobing was happening. Tell all the Karna lovers that Karna is a big hero like this. Karna is a hero in abusive language. Karna is a hero in filthy language. Karna is a hero in clapping while a woman is being disrobed in a full court. Karna was to be punished. Karna was to be punished because he did this. Shakuni was to be punished. Dushta Chatushtaya, all the four were to be punished. So why war? All these perspectives were there. In general public, people keep saying that Dwapara Yuga has to come to end. That is why to end Dwapara Yuga and to begin Kali Yuga, it was Krishna's mission as an avatara to bring war. All these are supernatural explanations. Let us leave them aside. But just look at dharma. What has to be done? People were at fault. People were villains. They committed crimes and they were to be punished. But Yudhishthira, in spite of all this, in spite of knowing all this, he prioritized the negotiations for avoiding war. That is what was making Draupadi angry. Draupadi was saying, you know that all this is correct and war is justified. In spite of all this, you are negotiating for avoiding war. This is what is making me angry as a wife, Draupadi said. But she was giving her own perspectives for why there has to be a war. So, is this villain a hero? No, he is a villain. That is the answer. And then why negotiations? Ethics and strategy. In ethics, actually, I don't know why the file that I have made here did not get copied into that system. Yeah, after the break, I'll show you all the shlokas, all the actual lines from Mahabharata, which Yudhishthira mentioned.
Acharya, after Pandavas come back, or when the the courtroom thing happens of this rope, what is the public sentiment? Is it described in Mahabharata?
Yes.
What is the public sentiment? How is it? Is it a similar outrage like we have right now when a similar incident happens?
Yes, there was a big outrage and it is repeated in Bhagavad Dhyana Parva by Krishna. While talking to Yudhishthira, he says, hey Yudhishthira, do you remember what happened that day on the court? All the public there were abusing Duryodhana, Dushasana, Karna and Shakuni. Do you remember? He says, what kind of vocabulary they were using against those people? How they were cursing them? They were giving shapas to Duryodhana, Dushasana, Karna and Shakuni, and how they were so angry that they wanted to beat them right away there itself. And people considered that Duryodhana, Dushasana deserve punishment then and there itself. When public are considering him to be punishable by them, why you, the husband of the person, the victim, you are not considering them to be punishable? This is what Krishna says in Bhagavad Dhyana Parva.
Okay. Still, there is, there never had a mutiny or anything in Duryodhana's camp because of this incident, right? His army.
Not because of this incident, but generally, Duryodhana was a dictator. He took care that law and order is well maintained.
Okay.
There is no mutiny.
Okay.
Yeah.